Welcome to the We Are Film podcast with your hosts, Cameron Gallagher and Zach Bouye.
What is up, guys? Welcome to the We Are Film podcast. My name is Cameron Gallagher, as always. Who am I with? I'm with two people.
I was going to say, I am a new dad, and this is Parker, my daughter.
Hi, Parker. And if you're watching the video version of this, you can see Parker right now. If you can't, You're missing out. Go watch the video version.
Definitely. If there's any video podcast you're going to want to tune into, it's this one. So you can see Parker. She's just going to be here for the intro, and then I'm going to have Brittany take her away.
And we are talking with Julian Terry today, a filmmaker. He's done some really amazing, awesome work in the last couple of years. So we're going to talk to him all about filmmaking, pitching, film festivals, selling your feature films, selling your short films. So a lot of cool, exciting stuff. But of course, Parker, what do you have to say?
Do you have anything to say?
And with that, let's get into the podcast. So I guess to start off, how did you get into filmmaking, and in particular, maybe like in the horror genre?
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, the horror genre in particular was very new to me in a weird way. I loved watching horror movies, but I never shot any. I was always doing like comedies or drama pieces, and I always wanted to do horror, but I always loved watching horror movies as a kid. Like, I think I saw The Thing at the age of 5. It's like I saw these movies that were really like crazy, and it's funny to think how long, like, I started writing horror stuff from when I was a little kid, but I don't know why it took so long. But basically, I think it was, I had done a lot of work at BuzzFeed when I came out here, and I think I shot like over 200 videos for them, and it was all comedies or little docu-style stuff. Very much everything had a social message to it, and it was really cool. But even the comedies, I loved shooting comedy pieces, but I didn't realize, like, oh, horror is the same thing as comedy. It's just, instead of building up to a punchline, you're building up to a scare. It was kind of a fun way to do it. And especially with the horror I shoot, it's really suspense pieces. It's very much kind of the stuff I loved, the Spielbergian stuff. That stuff I really love in the end. Is just like, oh, it's a way to really build up the tension and have fun with where you could take it. And that can go in any genre, really. Some of the best dramas have a lot of suspense building up. I think there's ways to take it, but I think it's a fun way to learn how to kind of build your craft a little bit with a genre piece like that.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's like, that's what I love. Is it? There's so much like technical like, it's so technical, where I feel like there's a lot of other genres that maybe the technical kind of falls to the wayside, where it's like, oh, whatever, like, where you're like, the camera movement and the way it works is so important in horror, I feel like. And at least that's for me what I enjoy too. So that makes total sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, like, in terms of filmmaking itself, it was very strange for me. I loved camera work, and I loved taking photos of everything. I even I really got into camera work. But when I went to Columbia College for film. I literally went first to Northern Illinois for engineering, because my dad really wanted me to do that crap, and it didn't really work out. And I transferred over to Columbia College, and the only class I've ever failed in college was actually my intro to film class, and I failed and dropped out. And I was very rebellious, and it was a lot of fun. But filming stuff there. But yeah, I got into a lot of heat with my professor, and he kind of really called it out in front of the class when I had flunked out. And I think a lot of my skill set really came from helping out my friends' shoots that kept continuing school. And I also learned a lot from my directing from, I used to work as a swim instructor, and I worked at a battered women's shelter for a bit. And when you teach kids, or teach the elderly, or even like kids that don't even speak English, or even like kids with disabilities. You're dealing with another level that you have to overcome, and you learn how to give proper direction and simplify things just to its bare minimum to get what you need. And it really, really helps out when it comes down to working with actors. I think it's really cool to see how you can adapt those same mechanics into trying to pull off a scene correctly or blocking a moment. It's really cool to take those same little things you learn and adapt them. But,
that's awesome. Yeah, I never thought about that. I mean, it's such like a conversational thing where people have to be comfortable with you. They have to feel like they can get to a certain point, and whether you're pushing them there or they're maybe, can easily get there. I guess that's sort of the communication obviously is a huge factor. So that makes total sense. Now switch to kind of some of the pitch side. So obviously you have sold a ton and done a lot of pitching, I assume, and probably even more pitching than, most people would think, beyond the ones that we see, obviously. Kind of talk about for you what the process is, because I'm assuming they might all be different. Obviously, in some cases, like I know just some of the stuff that I've done, it's like I had a concept, became a short film, and then it was how can you flesh it out to a feature. Kind of talk me through some of the ideas for you. Does it start from one concept? Does it start from a big, large feature film idea? And then how do you channel that into a pitch?
I just kind of like to have fun, like this is my bedroom when I shot Don't Peek In, and this is the bed I'm in, like Katie was right there when she was getting scared shitless, it was definitely like I kind of just like to have fun a lot of times. Like I like to see, okay, can we just have fun making a little project happen? I think the only time I ever really went into it with a proper like idea for a feature, that was They Hear It. That was that one where I had like a whole idea for a pitch, and the short was actually the opening scene. And that was a fun experience because that was very different, where I was like, oh, this is fully planned. But like Whisper, was very much like, oh, I just want to throw something together, a week before Halloween, and, let's shoot it over one night, like over a few hours, and then edit it the next night and do sound, color, and whatnot over the next few nights. And I think that's what's fun, just to make something in the moment, just make a fun scene. But then it's tough when like all of a sudden producers watch that and they're like, so what's the feature idea for this? And you're like, maybe I can figure something out. And you kind of sit down and you're like, okay, what can we do with this? Where can we take this? Because it's clear that people can get the idea that, oh, this is a piece of tech that we all have in our house that could all of a sudden hear voices that we can't even hear. It can pick up things that we can't. And I think that could be used in a fun way. And we found a good direction for it. But yeah, it took us a little bit to figure it out. And I think it's fun to go ahead and just make fun projects. Like Don't Peek, it was just one night when it was like 2 or 3 in the morning, and I get freaked out by every little stupid sound in the middle of the night. And I was sitting there playing Animal Crossing really late, and I think I don't know if it was something by my bed, but I thought I saw for a quick second, it looked like the top of someone's head behind my bed. And I was like freaked out, and I was like, huh. And I was like, okay, need to chill out. But I kept thinking about that. I'm like, oh, wouldn't it be interesting to make something spooky in the most innocent game that people are using to get by? I think it's really fun to go ahead and find things that aren't particularly scary and make them scary. Like I look at like, everything's a cemetery or a basement or an attic that seems to be the haunted place. And it's like, what if you go ahead and bring the scares somewhere else? Can you bring it to something more personal? Can you go ahead and make something scary with like the sound of a dog collar that's coming into your room? Can you make that seems so innocent and feels so nice? Can you make that creepy? And I think there's something fun there, a twist that you just don't see coming.
I particularly love that short, mostly because when Cameron first sent it to me like a few months back, I thought it was a parody. Like I thought it was going to be like an SNL skit where it's like has spooky tones, but then it will have something that's kind of quirky. And it almost like trick me again, because it's like, okay, it kind of started off spooky, but then you did have that playful moment where she was like, oh, this is actually really neat. And then it goes back into, no, this is scary.
Like, this is
Like,
horrific.
what is
Yeah.
going on? So that, I feel like that was also like, in general, like that kind of like subversion or subverting the audience is one of the best ways to kind of scare people. I know that when people were, when Get Out came out, I know that people were like, oh, the comedy in it was a little too intense. But it also, like, it was a really nice counterbalance to the horror and the jump
Absolutely,
scares
yeah.
and everything.
Oh, I mean, I think that's some of my favorite stuff. Like, I have a Jurassic Park poster sitting right here, and I love that line when Lex goes, "Where's the goat?" And all of a sudden the leg just slams the windshield. You're just like, oh
Yeah.
no, and the T-Rex comes out, and you're like, and it just eats the rest of the goat, and you're like, that is great. That is such a good setup and payoff, and it
And it
works
has
so
so many
well.
emotions.
Oh yeah. Well, there's something amazing. Like I fell in love with yeah, finding where that twist is. I like to almost find that bit of wonder, and then you kind of let people hang in there for a second when they're like, oh, okay, I'm listening, and then all of a sudden you flip it on its head. I think that's what's a lot of fun to me, is when you see something like Jurassic Park, where the first half of it's very much, in this realm of like, oh, look at the dinosaurs, there's the brachiosaur, look at this, the Triceratops is sick, oh, and you kind of get wrapped up in it, and then all of a sudden the power is out, the T-Rex breaks out of the paddock, and you're like, oh no. There's a lot of fun in that. I think, yeah, that's so much fun for me, is like, okay, can you go ahead, and it becomes way more of a heavier hit because you were just riding this high, and then bam, it's like, instead of being already prepared for it, there's something about trying to lift you up a little bit and you don't see it coming then. And I think that's what's a lot of fun, is like playing that off in a short,
Oh yeah.
Oh,
And now I'll say, how do you feel like you take these things, and are you making like for instance, like with Don't Peek, do you sit back and someone says, hey, let's get a feature of this. Do you sit down and is it story first? Are you writing a script? Do you feel like you're making like a pitch document first, like a visual lookbook? Because I know, like for me, sometimes I like to get like a visual look of something before, that way I can kind of see like, okay, what are we living in as like a world, that sort of thing.
yeah, I mean, so for Don't Peek, it was very funny because I was like, okay, well, this was just for fun because all the projects I was working on got pushed because of COVID. And I was like, okay, well, we're kind of sitting in this weird COVID hell until everything gets back to normal and I can shoot one of these movies. And so I was kind of like, well, I did this short, and I remember, I forget what I was doing. I think I was walking around, and I thought for a second, like, I came up with the idea for what the feature could be, and it wasn't because I was like, in my head, I'm like, it's just a short. I'm not going to try to make it a feature. But then, like, it's very easy to go ahead and make the haunted video game short, and that's it. And I think if you can come up with a twist that makes it feel like a bigger story, and this is just literally a moment, that's when I think you have something. Like Whisper took a little second, but it took a bit to figure out, okay, how do we make it so it's not just the haunted echo? You have to feel bigger. The Ring seems way bigger than a haunted videotape. That's
a great example. Yeah.
And I think if you can go ahead and figure that out, because obviously, yeah, if you pull off a scene that feels like, oh, there could be something bigger here. If you can find that bigger element, then you're good. I think for Don't Peek, it was figuring out, okay, I came up with a way in that was really fun. And then I was like, okay, a lot of people would just watch the short though, and like, I don't really see a feature out of this. And then you pitch the idea and they're like, oh, that's there. And so what I did was I went ahead, before the short even released, I think it was a month before, and I went ahead and I like to do a little bit of a lookbook and pitch at the same time. So I'll literally just grab all the elements I need, and then I'll just write out what the story is. And I write in a very weird way because I didn't go to film school. I didn't do all that stuff. And so what I like to do is I really taught myself story by writing out, like, I would take my scripts that were messy and I would just say, okay, how do I figure these out? And I would write them into kids version. And so like a children's book version where it's like 15 pages is your limit, and you have to have little pictures for each page, and I would just doodle them up, and I would put like a few lines on each page, and if your story could make sense in 15 pages, I knew I had something. And so I have children's books of all my story ideas in a fun way, but and they
That's
can
a
be super
super
dark,
clever idea,
but
though. That's a
yeah.
really great one. I've never heard anybody mention that before.
I mean, I was just something I came up with when I was trying to teach because I didn't really have a film school. I was literally teaching myself at home. So I would literally just, I think for Jurassic Park, Finding Nemo, I'd take stories that felt good to me, felt like they made sense, and I would literally just count out every shot, like how many shots were in each scene, how many lines of dialogue were in each scene, how many characters were in each scene. Like I would really break down movies to an extreme extent, but I would try to figure out what was working with them, what was going on here, and that breaking them down to like a children's book version really made sense to me, because I was like, I think I saw, maybe it was fine. I think I was like, oh, there has to be like a version of Jurassic Park that could be a children's book version. And then I got from there, I was like, can I do that with my own stories? And it kind of went from there. But yeah, basically I almost treat my pitch decks like that. Like, what's the children's book version? Like, I'll have something like a cool image that, you know, might give a little bit of the title, but I love to add a question in the beginning. What's some sort of question that you can get people to really think about for your entire pitch deck? And that's usually in the first page, or, you know, sometimes even before the title. But I like to have that first question up so it can just sit in the back of your head. And then from there, you go ahead and take them throughout the story, take them to the end. And with each page, you show an image that feels like it represents that scene in a just way. And it could also be a nice way to show your comps in a fun way too. And I think when you have a pitch deck that shows all that, you have something that everyone can understand what that movie is by the time it's finished. And, you know, I like to also include a little thing at the back where it's like a little director's vision, you know, like, okay, why, little statement that says like, okay, this is why I should be the one directing it. This is why what it means to me to tell this story. And I think having those little elements really do shape up a solid pitch deck. And it's always worked for me so far. But yeah, I really love it. You know, I think it's really fun to go ahead and tell a story in just can you tell it in just 15 pages or less?
Yeah.
You know,
it's
so
efficient.
Steal that.
Yeah,
I know,
ahead.
right? I'm like, wow, that's a great idea. No, I think it's so clever because, yeah, you're creating. I feel like it's a great way to look at it as a director, because you can break everything down to its most simple form, and it's like, does this make sense? But then not only that, it's like, okay, if it makes sense to you, then it can make sense to a producer, which I feel like in that case, the more efficient you can be with their time, the better chance you are to actually get that project going.
Yeah, and you know, I remember for Whisper, it was a very small pitch deck. I mean, it was very tiny, and literally it sold Spielberg just on the store, like the short, and just like, oh, there it is. You know, it clicked with the story, and you got the scene that kind of feels like, oh, that's the vibe we're going for. Okay, cool, we're in. And so that's what you want with these.
I was gonna say, do you feel like that,
you know,
in doing all these meetings, that there's a lot? Do you think there's like misconceptions out there about these pitch meetings? Because I think there's such stuff floating out there about what these pitch
100%.
meetings are.
Yeah, there's like books like Good in the Room and stuff. You read a lot of stories about pitching, and I think it's just changed so much. It changes, I think, it's changed drastically since some of these books were written in the 80s and 90s, you know? I think before it was like, oh, have your whole thing memorized, you know, have your like 40 minutes of a pitch, you're ready to go. And it's like, I haven't done any of those ever, you know? I like to I think if you create a discussion, that usually seems like the best fit. Like I, you know, every horror short I've made so far has been optioned. And I think what's interesting is, I think the best way to do it is just to keep it like a talk. I remember it was for Legendary. I was so nervous going in there, and I realized it was treating it like a campfire story is what made it feel like a solid discussion. You know, it got people excited because a lot of times these execs, they will be very stone cold, like, like just listening, and they don't show a sign of emotion. And you're just like, it's very tough. It's the tougher ones are on the phone, and that's even tougher because you're like, are they even?
Oh, that's gotta be worse.
Faces right now. Oh yeah, I've sold things over the phone, and it's
Oh,
terrifying. But yeah, I mean, sometimes you don't even need to do any phone call or pitch like that. But I feel like the best stuff is when you're in the room or the phone. It's treating it like a campfire, treating it out like, hey, this is just a story I'm talking about. And if they have any suggestions, you can go ahead and take whatever that is and you flip it on them and say, okay, yes, that's a cool thought. What if we did this with it? And then it's including them in it. It's making it feel like it's like a cool discussion. It's not like a hardened story that, oh, it has to be this is it perfectly. And it's like, oh no, that's a great question they ask. And you want to show that you're listening, and you're going to go ahead and bounce it back with them. So you're showing that you're quick. On top of that, it's showing that you're enthusiastic about it, that you're excited to work with them, that you're a collaborator and a team player. They don't want to see that you're like, no, it can't be that way. No, it doesn't make sense. If something doesn't make sense, you go ahead and say, oh, I don't know about that, but maybe we could, it would kind of bounce against this problem with the story, though. It doesn't really work with this thematic movement, but there's usually a note behind the note. What is that? What are they really after? Oh, maybe they just want it more exciting. Maybe they just want a little more of a thrill out of that scene. Okay, then you can go ahead and say, well, this doesn't work, but it could work. What if we did this? And that's maybe what exactly they're after. Maybe they're just looking to go ahead and make it a little more exciting. And that will go ahead and change up your whole discussion, because then it shows, okay, yeah, maybe sometimes you might be working with somebody that didn't even read your script. And you're just like, okay, that's really tough. I was talking to a friend of mine. She was pitching something that it was very exciting, but the exec hadn't read the script that she was pitching. And so it was very difficult to discuss the whole story. But I think there's a way to go about it. I think there's always a way to go ahead and create a solid ground, no matter where you are. And you go ahead and you establish what that ground is, and you go from there. You build up the groundwork and you work off of it. You build up a little friendship in there. I think it's always about keeping it fun and playful, nothing too serious, because they can sense when you're just desperate and just like, please, it's like, you're not going to go ahead and, like, if you're out and about and someone comes up to approach you to like, hey, do you want to go, can I buy you a drink? Then are you going to go ahead and get a drink from the guy who's like, please let me buy you a drink? Or, hey, whatever, it's fine. Is it like, there's something that's so funny about like showing a coolness to your side that, hey,
it's less
it would be really cool.
kind of.
Yeah.
It's very much like working retail.
Yeah, there you go. Retail. There's ways to go ahead and think of this.
It's like you very much have to have, obviously your script would be like, if you really know a product, you have everything listed in the back of your head, so you can really just kind of list it off and kind of go about it, just, because you know it from heart. But then it is really tricky, because if you've ever worked in retail, it's like each customer will have either like you were saying, either read your script, or if they haven't read your script, they might have their own know-abouts, and you have to be able to counteract and come up with things. Are there different things that you've picked up from each pitch that you will then be able to apply to the next pitch?
Yeah, I mean, it's very funny because each studio thinks very differently. Like there's certain people like, oh yeah, you pitch to this person, okay. It's funny how some of them, like, they'll make you rethink your whole story just by their questions. Like there was one guy that actually was the one that accepted one of my pitches, that optioned it. And he was so like meticulous on detail. Like he was asking questions that I hadn't thought of. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't want to just sit here with no answer, but I want to go ahead and actually come up with an answer with him. Say, okay, well, I didn't think of that, but what if it was like this? And that helped out a lot, because it gave some sort of like, okay, yes, I could see that. Okay, that's giving us, and so, because yeah, there's some people that want to know every little detail. Some of them are just looking at the trailer in their head and saying, could that trailer work? Some look at just the numbers. You know, you don't know what the studio's like till you go ahead and pitch out to them and hear them out. And I think it's about creating like a little bit of some sort of camaraderie in the beginning. It's just kind of hanging out with your friends. You know, you're hanging out with the producers. Producers might know them very well. You don't know how it's going to go down, but I think it's about having a very relaxed environment and coming in there just trying to create a fun discussion. And if things work out, they work out. But in the end, it's all good, you know, just kind of have that attitude that, you know, your life isn't dependent on this one pitch. You know,
right.
You want to go
you
ahead
won't die.
And, you know, as you won't die, it's all good. You know, life will go on. And I think it's showing that it would be cool to work together, but it's all good if it doesn't work out. You know, I think that's the main thing. You know, when it comes down to these shorts, a lot of times, you know, you get a lot of these general meetings, and sometimes the general meetings, they'll try to pitch you a story and you're like, oh, that's cool. But it just depends. I think it just depends on what gets you excited, what gets them excited. You know, they might be excited about your project, but they might want to take it in a different direction that you might not like. And so you have to also figure out a good way to respond to that. There's all these different scenarios that can come about. But I think the big thing that we should be teaching now is not being so, I guess, strict on like memorizing a story to pitch them, all this stuff. I think it's about having something simple that they can read and they can understand what your vision is for it. And then you go ahead and say, hey, this is what it is. You know, what do you have for me? If they want to go ahead and say, okay, it's not for us, or, oh, what if you did this? We could be interested to take it this route, you know, and it's just having a real discussion, you know, having a very calm discussion, having it really relaxed. I know I got very overwhelmed my first pitch. You know, I think it's very easy to get overwhelmed, but yeah, it becomes a lot of fun in the end. You know, it's exciting. And I think it's always fun to also practice pitching with your friends.
That's a good point.
I try that a lot.
It kind of experiment too, so that way you're not blindsided on the day, I guess.
Yeah, and I think sometimes it's also important to do soft pitches. I think I do that a lot. It's kind of subconsciously, where I'll like, someone might ask, oh, what else are you working on? I'm like, well, so I'm working on this idea where it's a contained thriller with this, this, and this. And you might talk for a few minutes and they might be going, that's really cool. Send me that when it's finished. Or they might go, oh, that's cool. You know, and you can kind of feel it out. Or if they might give you a text or a call later on saying, hey, what's going on with that script that you're working on? Or what's going on with this? And you know that there's some sort of excitement for it. There might be some want for this thing. I think it's really cool to figure out exactly, you know, how you go about a conversation. I think I love to do soft pitches though. In the end, I like to give a little taste of it and get them to ask about it, you know, like, what about that idea we're talking about this, you know, or look, sometimes it's even nice to even hear out what they're looking for. You know, you might walk in there and they're like, oh, well, you know, we're looking for more of a film with a social commentary. We love Get Out. Or some people might be like, oh, we're looking for a fun slasher because slashers are coming back. You know, you never know what that discussion can look like. And so it's important also to know what they're after or know what's clicking with them. Like maybe you might be pitching a scene and they might look at the table or look around, but if you go ahead and say something that might excite them, they'll look directly at you and be listening. You're like, okay, they're excited by this scene. I'm going to keep telling them more of those scenes. I'm going to go ahead and rechange my pitch to talk about that. You know, like there's a great moment in the movie Ed Wood that I love where he's talking about I think he's pitching maybe it's not Plan 9 from Outer Space or Bride of the Atom or something like that, and he keeps changing up. He's like, oh, it's terrifying, full of monsters, and this woman's like, oh, that freaks me out, and he's like, well, it's a love story too though, and he keeps changing it up, and I think there's something really funny about that. But I think there is some sort of sense in like, oh yeah, talk about what they're digging. It might change up your story, but at least you can have a discussion in terms of what they're looking for and what you're looking for. you know?
Yeah, nothing's ever set in stone. So it's not like you have to leave that pitch meeting and be like, hey, well, it's exactly what we just agreed on now. Because obviously that would be, when they're seeing hopefully the final story and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I have only pitched like stuff that's all in pitch deck form. So it's always been like kind of like, oh, it's where I'd like to take it. But what's cool about pitching it this way is if you're interested in coming aboard, it'd be cool to go ahead and adapt a story together and figure it out, instead of it just being like my way only. It's, hey, why don't we work together as a team and figure the story out together? And I think that's really fun because then it gives them more of a chance to go ahead and find what they want to say with it. And it gives kind of just more of a team player kind of mindset.
Oh yeah, definitely. And actually speaking of collaboration too, I wanted to kind of ask you about, because I know you actually collaborate with others. You produce some other stuff that I've seen recently.
Mm-hmm.
In particular, the one that I saw just recently and I absolutely loved was The Lake, right? Is it Lake or Lake? Yeah. Yeah. So just kind of talk about how you also come on as a producer for people, and like, what's that like as a process for you and working with other people?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. There's one actually we're going to be pitching out that I produce. I produce everything with my roommate and also the monster Dumpy, Alex Anderson. He was also we met during the BuzzFeed days as interns together. And, when it comes down to producing, I like to have a hand in the story a lot. I've been producing like, I think 4 or 5 short films that were all just kind of like, oh, they're fun, but I love to go ahead and dive in and say, okay, what can we do with this story to make it feel different? The Lake was very different when I first was reading the script. And then when I was looking at the location, I was like, why don't we do, instead of in a house, why don't we go on the lake? Like, why don't we do, and there's something funny about talking about like, let's have a real discussion here. Why don't we go ahead and change it up here? And I love to see, I don't know, we're always seeing things that, what's been done before. We've seen so many scary short films. There's so many of them. And I'm like, okay, well, can we do something different? Can we flip it on its head? Can we try something new? And that's stuff that gets me excited. And I also, help out a lot when it comes down to lighting as well. I like to even help out a little bit with camera moves and stuff like that. I know that it really helps having like a director there as a producer, because I have an idea of how I would do things and they might have another idea. And so if they want like a suggestion or a note, they might go and pull me aside, or I might whisper them like, oh, maybe try a take this way. It'd be cool just to have in the edit. I'm not going to go ahead and say, use this take. I'm saying like, oh, it might be fun to try a different take of this. But I've definitely had fun. Like I've played a monster in the lake, actually. I'm one of the monsters that dips its head in the water in the background. Yeah.
I remember seeing the behind the scenes of you shooting. I won't spoil it for anyone. There's a part that I knew that you shot because I remember watching some of the behind the scenes, or you were there while you were shooting. Was it in your pool? Right? Was that?
Oh, no. So we were actually in this lake in Big Bear, and it was beyond freezing. Like we shoot overnight, and it was like an overnight shoot. It was 4 a.m. And then I was producing another short the next day. So I was DPing and producing the next short. So I literally, with no sleep, drove back to Burbank from Big Bear. And it was like a zombie pull up, and it was like, okay, here we go. But it was like going from an extreme cold of being in this lake in Big Bear. Actually was wearing the mask from Whisper in it. It's kind of funny. But really? There's so many little things that we've kind of borrowed and dragged in other ones. Like the mask in Don't Peek was a mask used on a monster in another short that I'm pitching out right now. And so I'm always, we're using stuff, throwing effective
universe as well.
No universe. It's just
the
like,
Julian Terry universe.
Yeah, there it is. I mean, it's pretty much just like, oh, can you borrow this or that? I think it's funny when you have like just we're all like kind of in on the same team of helping each other out. And I think that's what's most important is like, okay, can you go ahead and like I'm down to drive out there and be a monster or something, or help out with setting up. Like on this one short, we literally had I sat there in the middle of the night, dressed up a huge spider web across the trees and stuff like that. And I was just like, oh my God, I'm exhausted. This is ridiculous, but it's so much fun. I'm down to do this stuff. I think if you can go ahead and show your support in different ways. Some of them, Alex and I will go ahead and put in some of our own financing to help out people and whatnot. And so, yeah, it's interesting to kind of see how these different shorts go about. Joey is a really good buddy of mine. We lived next to each other. He actually recognized me when I was like walking my dog one day, and he was like, Julian Terry, yeah. And we started chatting, and we started just watching horror movies after work and stuff, and just hanging out. And I was working on They Hear It at the time, and he was working on Polaroid, and it was just funny how like you just never know how that can work out. I think what's fun is just finding people that you can trust and you're willing to work with, and just figure it out from there. And I think there's also a mindset that you have to work with out here. I think not to get dark and depressing, but it gets pretty tough out here. It gets really tough. You're stuck at times where you're like, what am I doing here? Trying to censor myself at times.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there's times where you're like, yeah, you were sitting there broke. Maybe you just got, like there were times where I was during breakup, and I'm like, what am I doing with my life? What am I even doing? Like, I'm sleeping on my friend's couch. I remember when I was in Chicago, I was living in Rogers Park, and I had flunked out of film school. Here I am teaching, because that's when I was writing on the side, but that was it. And then it was the middle of the night, and I was walking outside and got caught up in a drive-by shooting, and I was terrified. I was so scared, and I just was hiding, petrified, and I remember thinking, like, my big regret was not doing something with my life and going out to LA and going for it. I was too afraid. And I was just remembering, I was just so scared. And I just remember, like, that whole night I didn't sleep. I kept checking myself to make sure I was okay. I was like in this weird shock, but I realized, I was like, I'm not gonna die out here. And I just packed everything and drove out to LA, and I didn't have much money at all. And like
wow,
$200
yeah,
or
that's
something.
wild.
It was insane. When you're out here, it can be scary. There are times where, I was sleeping out in my car for a week. I think there's times where you're lost and it can be scary, but it's just about staying on that treadmill the whole time, because it will pay off in some way, but you have to keep going. You can't just be like, well, I've been out here and nothing's coming. No, you got to keep going. Like, COVID really threw all my studio films in this weird little blender.
Yeah,
So
I was gonna say.
I was like, well, thankfully I kept going and made another short just for fun, because that really kind of helped out and also gets you in more meetings and whatnot. But I think there's something really fun about constantly pushing stuff out. You can't just be sitting there quiet. You got to keep writing. You got to keep doing something. And I think that's the most important thing, is just to keep on going, even when it's scary. When you're like, I'm so thankful for Alex, because I was sleeping on his couch for a little bit. And we've worked together on every short, even during these tough times, he's always been there. And I think that's what's important, is having those people that are your support system in some way. And like my sound designer, Christina Gonzalez, she's been on every horror short so far. And I will sit there, and it's funny because it's usually after the entire short's pretty much done, and we're bringing it home right now with the sound design. And it's usually like this therapy session for a day or two. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, yeah, this is, it was a tough one, I don't even, is this even working? Like, I'm always second guessing this stuff. And, we're making the sounds together and putting a mic in my mouth as I'm making these weird monster sounds. And I'm like, I don't know, there's moments that you have with your friends. And I think that's what's the best part, is that we're just making stuff together and we're cheering each other on. I make sure to like Zoom my friends that are also in the same spots that I'm in, that are also filmmakers that feel stuck, or filmmakers that are like, we're up on the rise of it, or some that have made just a movie that went out to theaters, and you're like, okay, but now what? I think there's people to always talk to that are all in the same kind of boat. And I think it's always important to check in with each other. And if you can help out in their shoots, help support them and get them excited about filmmaking. I try to give all my friends calls and just get them, you know, pumped talking about movies all day, you know?
Oh yeah, you can't. I mean, there's nothing more fun. I say, and I noticed too. Like, I just noticed that, you know, and obviously, well, Zach and I are both way over here in New York, and you know, the support of it seems like the same group of people too that I notice. You know, like Danny Donahue's in that group of people that I know, and there's a couple others, and it's just like everyone's so great. Like, I've been able to send stuff to you and him and other people, and you know, great about giving feedback. And so I've just noticed it's such a cool community. And you know, it's like this cool horror filmmakers community, and you know, even there's some of us that are obviously not physically near each other, but it's just cool to see that so many people giving other people support. And I think that definitely, especially now more than ever, it's super important. Where, you know, it definitely is. You know, there was a lot of things that were obviously for you, a ton of them that were kind of on the docket that of course kind of got thrown around. So how have, other than obviously making Don't Peak, how have you sort of tried to adapt with all of that and deal with all those things, and also try to, you know, move forward? Like, what's that been like?
Sorry, can you repeat that question? Like
Oh
deal with?
yeah, just like obviously COVID has thrown completely everything off as a filmmaker, and obviously you went and did Don't Peak, so that was obviously a huge thing. But how do you feel that you've tried to take advantage of these sort of down times where you're like, oh man, nothing's going right, or you know, it's like, oh, this didn't work out, or that, you know, what do you feel like is good? What takes you out of those, I guess?
I mean, honestly, it's doing these shorts. Like The Nurse was a short that was born when I was going through a bit of a breakup, and I was sleeping on Alex's couch, and I was like staying up late, and I just scrolled through Facebook. Like I was like, what can I do with my life? What am I doing? And I scrolled and I saw the contest, and it was going to be due very soon. I was like, oh, may let's do this. And it was so exciting to throw myself into something. There's I think it was a New York Times article that dropped.
Contest, right?
Yeah, the
yeah.
Annabelle creation one, yeah. And
oh, that's yeah.
And yeah, like we had a meeting with New Line that ended up happening at like November 7th. It kept getting pushed, and since it happened on November 7th, I remember I was like, oh, it was like a week before Halloween. I was like, it'd be cool to show that I haven't just done one horror short, that I can do more. And that's when I was just like, let's just throw Whisper together. And that was just made up pretty much on the spot. And that was shot in my bedroom, same bed actually. But yeah, that was just done with barely anything. I literally had to return that Amazon Echo because I couldn't afford to have it. So Best Buy is very nice for that.
I think I got that 15 or day return policy there.
Yeah, I was gonna say horror shorts and like doing like commercial film are like two polar opposite worlds. Usually it's like you get a commercial job so that way you can buy new gear, and it's like you do shorts with the gear that you have acquired from like scraping by.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I think doing the commercial work, I was doing like I was mostly a DP for that stuff, and you get all this gear and stuff, and I definitely there was a little bit of they here at that. I definitely was like I was DP in this project. It was a commercial spot when I was like, we're just gonna I'm just gonna go ahead and I told the producers, I'm like, I'll return the Alexa Mini, I'll clean it and stuff like that, make sure it's good. And it's like, yeah, and then you guys don't have to deal with it. And like, oh, thank goodness. And here I am, like later on that night, just in the middle of the woods. And oh my God, that's
just
funny. But
making sure it's all clean and all good, ready to go.
Yeah. Oh, you got to make sure that the firmware and stuff. And here we are in the middle of the woods. I'm like, hope nothing happens. I'll be in trouble. But to be a little, it's fun to get sneaky with things and try to pull it off. But Don't Peek. This one was all shot on a Blackmagic Pocket 4K, and it was shot literally with only the things we had in the apartment. And that's what was really fun, was like showing that. Everyone always bugs me like, oh, I don't have $5,000 or $10,000 to make a short. I can't do it this year. And I'm like, you don't need that. You can go ahead and make something for whatever you got. You can borrow a camera, from anybody. You can pull the stuff off. It's just about coming up with a fun idea that people might want later. And it was just fun that it got optioned, that, it was a no budget short. I think there's And that short looks great on YouTube. And I'm like, yeah, the compression is going to destroy your footage. It doesn't matter if it's shot in the wax or red. It's like, it's going to just butcher it. So I might as well shoot on something cheap and just use the money elsewhere, you know?
Oh, I think it looks awesome. That's actually one of the things I love the look of. I feel like all of your shorts have had like a nice distinct look to them, and they all look so like just clean and like pristine looking. I'm always like, man, like, how does he do this?
It's funny. I think the exact opposite. Like, these are not good. They feel a little rough, you know. But you know, I think it's good that, you know, we're our toughest critics. But I think the fun is like, yeah, I never look at my stuff and think, oh, that's clean, that's good. It's like, don't peek. I'm like, let me just keep, and I'm just coloring it. So each short gets better and better with it. I learn color. You know?
Oh yeah, but it's like next time we'll get it. Next time we'll do.
Yeah, next time it will be a little better. I keep thinking like, okay, what's it gonna look like next time? But yeah, it's been a fun thing, just kind of making stuff, and you know, I think the best thing to do. There was a great article, I think it was on New York Times, was it? It was about the term languishing, about how we kind of sit in this weird place between depression and, you know, there's some people that there's something about like, yeah, we're almost left in this place of this toxic positivity where you always have to be like, everything's great, things are good. And it's like, yeah, no, sometimes it's not so great. Sometimes it's just downright rough. And you're like, man, I'm broke. I don't even know how to pay rent next month. What am I going to do? I'm scared. Relationships falling apart, whatever it is. It's okay to say those things. It's okay to talk about this. The stuff that helps me out in those situations, it's getting a small win. And whatever that win is, it can be in, maybe it's a film festival you got into. Maybe it's writing a script. It could even just getting a short film script done. Whatever that is, there's a little bit of getting a win done. You know, one thing that's really funny is I built this little Lego Millennium Falcon in the beginning of COVID lockdown, and that made me feel somewhat better. I was like, oh, I accomplished something, you know? Don't Peek was great because I was like, oh, I have something to focus on. It's something to kind of keep my mind going. And I think that's important to do, is just, it can be a small little short. It can be whatever it is, just something to get your brain thinking on something else besides how, you know, rough the day is. I think it's fun to go ahead and, I remember like the most exciting stuff for me was when I was working at a very depressing job as an intern. I was in a bad relationship. I was just in a really rough place. But the thing that got me so excited was writing at the end of the day. It was going to Starbucks and writing. I remember when I was in Chicago and I was broke, and the most exciting thing at the end of the day was writing on my script till Starbucks closed or Barnes & Noble closed, wherever the cafe I was at closed. And I would just be like, I feel like I got my little win in, you know, and it gets me excited about what's going to happen the next day. I think having those little things, whatever that little project is, just keep nurturing it. Don't let it just die in the back of your head. I think that's the most important thing to keep you going, at least.
Awesome. Yeah, I love it. I feel like that's one of the things that's, I mean, it's like, I was telling Zach, like we finished up the short film before, and it was like, it wasn't very long before we were on to the next. Cause it's like, I hate that in between time. Like that's the worst, the worst feeling in the world is like, I always like having to look forward to something, right?
Yeah, I think it's important to always have something to look forward to. I think, you know, one thing I always tell people too is we all are kind of these weird little mothers to our short films. Like they're like our little movie babies. And we're like, oh, it's got to be perfect. It can't leave yet. It's got to be perfect. And you're like, okay, well, eventually you have to let things go. You got to let it go and become a thing. You know, you can't just kind of hold on to it forever. And yeah, I remember, you know, Whisper. I was so nervous about that one because I was like, this mask was like $15. It looks bad. Like I was sitting there, like you can see the glove bending as it's trying to move this. It's like I kept seeing all these little problems with it. I'm like, we whipped this thing together so quickly, and I'm like, like you can. I don't know. I was like, no one's gonna like this thing. There's no filmmaker that's gonna see this and think that I'm a capable person. And I was so like hesitant, but there was like Halloween and middle at Halloween day, and I was like, okay, you know what, whatever. And I just uploaded it, and I was scared because I'm like, I'm like days away from this meeting with New Line. What if they see it and they're like, oh, it's not good, you know? But all that was in my head. Sure enough, literally Steven Spielberg loved that short a year later. And it's like, and wanted the option. It's like, you never know. Just, I always tell people, cut the umbilical cord. Just let it go. Let that baby free and let it grow up and become, you know, the short it should be, and let everyone see it, you know? I think it's so easy to let things die in a hard drive. And I think it's just important to just let your art free, you know?
Yeah, that's definitely something that me and Cameron kind of go back and forth on. We're always, it seems like every like 3 weeks, we're always just talking, and we always end up on the same conversation of just like, I'm the kind of person that like to take little slow details and then really just like just work them until they shine. And he really likes to just kind of like get things cranked out and finished, but then he leaves a lot of holes and everything. And it's like it's nice to have a back and forth, but it's also it's really nice to keep that mindset of watch any of your favorite movies and then just try to go through and pay attention to all the mistakes that are in big Hollywood productions, and then realize that the first time you watch that you probably didn't notice them. So
Yeah, that's, you know, there's some like mistakes that I have that I'm like, and there's a mistake in one of my shorts that I'm like, oh my God, this is like embarrassing. And you know, like everyone's gonna point this out and no one has yet. It's like the one, and like I keep waiting for someone to go and say, you know, that doesn't make sense. Why is this light on when the power's supposed to be out? And you're like, ooh.
And when it comes to
what are you talking about?
shorts, I make a lot of analogies, but I always like to compare everything to like the old school character creator sliders, where it's like you have a certain amount of points that you can give to like your strength or your speed or your stamina.
Yeah.
And it's like when you like, and I heard this on the Corridor Digital podcast, Nico was saying how he's just like, you know how to focus a camera. It's like, you know how to get clean audio. And it's like, you know how to cut together something. But it's like when you're doing all these things, it's like something's got to give to make something get put together. And
you know,
that's another point to make to where it's like, yeah, like we do all these things, we're going to mess up with these things. But I think filmmakers aren't so, you know, hard on other people as they are on themselves. So it's like watching other people's
absolutely.
it's just like, wow,
100%.
I'm amazed that they even got this thing out, because I don't think I could have made this.
I mean, that's the thing. I think there's a very big difference between like filmmakers and critics. Like I always think of the analogy of like there's those guys that just are on fantasy football and they're like talking smack about the players, but like you don't see the players like going off on about players all the time. It's like, no, they know how tough it is to be out there. You know, I remember in high school when I used to be like, you know, this is just an entertainment piece, not a film. And it's like you have those thoughts and you're like, oh, it's such a lame thing. Because then once you pick up a camera, you're like, oh my God, like it's a miracle this thing doesn't have a tripod in the background. Oh my God, this thing cuts together. This should get like an Oscar just because it cuts together. It makes sense, you know? I think it's funny how like you realize how much work goes into it and how it's a whole process. And I think you gain so much more from actually filming it. And I tell a lot of my actors or even DPs, I'm like, just direct something so you know what a director is looking for, what they're looking for, and what they're thinking about. Because a lot of times these actors, they don't know how to speak to the director. They almost are just like, okay, I don't understand what they're looking for in the scene. But if they direct something themselves, then they come back and they're like, okay, I know what they're looking at right now. I know what they're going to try to edit to this shot, this insert. Okay, that makes sense. And I always tell people just to try, you know, learning what's in that process. As like I've literally done every job on set. You know, for a while, I mean, I was a DP. I didn't know how to talk to the DP, so I literally worked my way up from an AC as a grip because I was a wrestler. They're like, oh, you can carry stuff. Here you go. And I was like, okay, I'll do that. And I was doing grip electric. I worked my way up camera to opping, and you know, I was gaffing and learned how to light faces. And I was like, okay, cool. Then, you know, DP'd music video stuff, and that was fun. I was like doing camera opping and AC work for Discovery Channel. I didn't even know how to use those cameras. I was just running and gunning as fast as I could. And you really kind of work your way up. You got to keep learning and doing every job on set. You're never going to, I don't think it's smart to jump in straight to directing. You should know what each job is like and know what you're going to look for in each thing. Know what it's like to go ahead and capture audio on set. Know what it's like to be a script supervisor and know what's going on in terms of what you're even paying attention to with dialogue. And when like an actor says a different line, it's important to have all these abilities, even PD. I tell people to do every job. The one job I haven't done is anything in for a bit, I didn't even know visual effects, and I took a job at Pixelmondo, the visual effects house, just for a year and a half, so I could learn about that side of things and how to save money that way for bigger productions. The crazy thing is I just don't know anything about makeup. That stuff is wild to me. I give people major respect for that.
That's like the magic. Like,
yeah.
When I see that kind of stuff together, like we have some special effects going on right now, and it's like this is movie magic. Like I don't know how you're doing what you're doing or doing any of this stuff, but it's incredible.
But even like just normal makeup, like I've seen actors come to set and I'm like, oh, I didn't even recognize them until they've dressed into that perfect character that they normally are in. I'm like, wow, that's so cool to see. Okay, now maybe their cheekbones were accentuated, maybe they look a certain way, and you're like, wow, there's a magic in that. There's a magic in all the prosthetic stuff where you can make these awesome monsters. I think there's so much cool stuff that we just don't talk about. Yeah, I wish I knew some of that stuff, because I'm like, that stuff feels wild to me. It's a whole nother language, but I
I've definitely felt that way when I'm like setting up a like camera and some lights, when it's just like a small quick shoot and we do have someone doing makeup, and it's just like, wow, this person isn't nearly as shiny as I was when I was getting like the lighting tests.
Yeah.
It's exactly. Like they actually know what they're doing. That's right.
Yeah. And I think the same thing goes with like, cinematography. If you just don't know what you're doing and you're like, the light's just right over the camera, but it's not looking good. What's up? And you're like, well, you want to know what the light is, the color temperature, and you learn all that stuff. And it's important to learn all that. I think it's easy though to get caught up in the gear talk. I think the problem we get into is the first question is, oh, what's the camera that you shot on after you shot a short? And you're like, okay, this camera, or oh, okay, what lens, or what this, and you get into gear talk constantly right there in the get-go. And it's fun to have a simple talk about it, but sometimes that's the only part of it that's spoken about. It's important to talk about it. Oh yeah, well, this scene was incredible. I love the way you blocked the scene. This was really fantastic. I love trying to talk to filmmakers about that. So instead of it just being a gear discussion, it's important to go ahead and talk about, how a certain scene was executed right. And I love to go ahead and talk about performances and such. I really like this moment here. I love to talk about influences, but yeah, it's very easy for filmmakers to get into a gear talk. There's a lot of broness in filmmaking culture, and it's just all in these. You see in the YouTube comments, and you see it in these websites where it's just like bros talking about reds and whatever, and it's like, let's take a break. It's cool, from that but it's talk. Yeah, it's like this toxic nonsense. It's like the Snyder Bros. It's like we're just talking about filmmaking. It should be open to everybody, and we shouldn't be like team Alexa or team Red or this. And I don't know. There's ways to go ahead and have just a discussion about, oh, I use this. What about you? Okay, cool. That's a cool method. I love how you went ahead and use the Steadicam to pull this moment off.
I miss the days of $500 DSLRs. Those were prime, just like, oh, just be creative and just figure it out.
I got my T2i still.
There we go.
That thing I definitely used till it died.
That DSR Revolution days, miss that a little bit.
I mean, I will say that Whisper was shot a good chunk with the Sony A7S. I think there's
And
You know,
people didn't
it's
complain that
great.
it's only 8-bit.
Oh, I learned the problems with 8-bit when I was like, because I shot a lot of that stuff. It was all shot during daytime, and I just put a little something with the windows. But yeah, when I tried to crunch it down, I was like, oh no,
Yeah,
this does not look good. I'm trying to crunch it
my
down.
camera is the Sony the A7R, so it's like
Hmm.
it's great photos. I love the photos. And then anytime I switch from using the Pocket 4K to back to using this, I'm like, oh, I forgot about white balance.
Oh no.
Yeah,
Yeah.
white balance. Oh no. Yeah, we're gonna use those the Lytro cameras eventually, and you just
Oh,
don't even pull focus.
You-
You just
you don't have to do anything,
do that
right?
post. Yeah, it's crazy.
Wild.
But yeah, no, I think it's interesting to see like, yeah, how each thing progresses. Like that Black Magic is like better than the original Red One. And I look at the Red One and I'm like, that thing made the Social Network, you know, it's incredible. It's crazy to think what cameras we have access to nowadays, and the computers we use. It's amazing to see how much progress has been done technology wise. And I think it's just easier and easier to make your stuff. And I feel like, yeah, if you can make a short in your bedroom with 2 people and get that option to a movie, I feel like that just goes to show anybody should be able to pull this off. You know, it's just the amount of focus you put on blocking or having fun with doing something a little different. You know, you just never know how it can happen.
Well, I think we got to end on that note, because that was probably the best advice.
Yeah, I have to say, you know, I'm so grateful that I was in lockdown with an amazing producer, Alex Anderson. Like, he was there with me with all my horror shorts. So that obviously was very helpful. He also had the camera. And we both just spoke film for so long. He was always my AC or the people to come aboard on projects, because he also thinks outside the box like me. Like, you know, he took my desk lamp and literally put a blue gel on it and made it a moonlight, you know? You know, Katie Seta, my girlfriend, and also she was a phenomenal actor in the thing. And she was willing to put up with some ridiculous stuff, you know. Here we are, we had a little cardboard cutout with an angry face. I'm like, okay, that's the monster. And, you know, that's what we're working with here. But like, what is it? You know, the way we made that thing was so much fun, because I literally wrote a script, but I threw it out the window and I ended up just drawing it out like in storyboard form. And it was like, okay, this makes sense to me. And they trusted me. And I just made a little music playlist and just played music the whole time on set. And it was great. You know, we just recorded audio afterwards just on an iPhone, and it just worked out really nicely. I think if you just go ahead and have fun with it, you know, I think having fun and just like, oh, you know, I kept saying to myself, okay, well, it's just a lockdown short. I can be experimental. Maybe the drawer opens and there's kind of like this fun little thing to it. And I think that was what made it feel a little more free, and was like, oh, it's just about having fun here. I'm not going to be as harsh on myself as I usually am. And I think it's important to have that mindset for whatever you do next. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. But yeah, definitely make sure you have a solid team when you have your little core group there.
We Are Film. The We Are Film podcast is brought to you by the Black Mountain Visuals Podcast Network.